When you hear the word fairy, it makes you think of creatures like Tinkerbell or the fairy godmother. These kinds of fairies are always friendly, magical things. But if we want to dive deeper into what a fairy is, we need to set aside the Disney idea for a moment. From causing chaos in homes to signaling death with their piercing screams, there's an evil side to fairies that not many people know about. This is the dark and tragic truth about fairies. So what exactly is a fairy? Well, the term fairy is used in various European cultures and is often interchanged with words like fae or fair folk. These words refer to supernatural beings with magical qualities. So a fairy can be any mythical creature that fits in this broad definition. It's more of a category than a specific type of creature. That's why fairy tales are filled with all sorts of magical beings, from dragons and elves to goblins and dwarves, alongside fairies themselves. In these tales, fairies are kind and have close ties to humans. But in other stories, their roles can be much darker than what you'd find in a typical fairy tale today. To understand why these tales have darker origins, we have to explore the different types of fairies and the folklore around them. So, fairies are classified into two groups: the Seelie Court and the Unseelie Court. The Seelie Court has the most beautiful and vibrant of all fairies. They actively seek out chances to help humans, offering blessings and granting wishes in return for favors. Seelie fairies are closely linked with spring and summer, preferring the light and warmth of those seasons. Now, the Unseelie Court is made up of darker fairies. These creatures are hideous and have no interest in being friendly to humans. They thrive in the darker months of autumn and winter. Unseelie fairies dabble in dark magic and harm humans just for the fun of it. Oh, and they're famous for stealing human children. Beyond these courts, fairies can also be categorized as trooping, solitary, or domesticated. Trooping fairies form groups with their own societies, rules, and laws, while solitary fairies prefer to be alone and are often seen as tricksters. Domesticated fairies, on the other hand, are part of human households, providing their services in exchange for food and shelter. When it comes to how they look, fairies are typically depicted as small, human-like creatures with wings. But the truth is that their size can vary, and not all fairies have wings. In fact, many can mimic human forms, making them a pretty diverse bunch. Just take a look at changelings, for example. These creatures are from old European stories, and they're pretty sad characters. When fairies snatch away a kid, the replacement they leave behind is called a changeling. Now, these changelings try to look like the missing person, but they never quite get it right. They might look a bit odd with long teeth or big, weird eyes that make you wonder if they're your loved one. The thing about changeling stories is they're kind of dark. When a fairy exchanges a human child with a changeling, they often end up as outcasts. If you found out you had a changeling instead of your real kid, there were a few tricks to try and get them to return the child. Some people thought making the changeling laugh might help, while others went as far as torturing them. Not a good idea, obviously. People also believed taking the changeling back to the wild where the fairies lived might work. The sad part about changelings is that they're seen as a burden by fairies because they eat a lot but can't help out much. One really famous story about a changeling is from Ireland in 1895. A woman named Bridget Cleary died suddenly, and her husband thought she'd been taken by fairies and replaced with a changeling. It's a tragic story that shows the darker side of the old legends. This rings true with the story of the solitary house fairies, boggarts and brownies. Brownies are these helpful little creatures that sneak out while everyone's asleep to get chores done around the house. And they're pretty modest too. All they ask for in return is some food and drink, especially cake, milk, and cream. Now, brownies are seen as a good sign for a household. But here's the thing, they're kind of touchy. They can get upset over the smallest things, like if you move their stuff around. If you don't calm them down, they might just up and leave. And that's the best case scenario. If they're really annoyed, they could turn into boggarts, basically evil versions of brownies. Boggarts are troublemakers, pure and simple. They'll cause chaos around the house, stealing stuff, messing with your pets, even souring your milk. They're not above creeping into your bed at night and giving you a scare. Here's the worst part. They'll follow you wherever you go. Moving houses won't shake them off, so you're pretty much stuck with them. Yikes! Now it's time to talk about pixies. You might have heard about these whimsical little fairies. Pixies are said to live underground, hanging out in big mounds and stone circles. Generally, they're seen as harmless and cute, kind of like playful children. They love getting together in big groups, dancing, singing, pulling pranks on people. Pixies were known for being friendly to humans as long as you treated them right. Some stories even talk about them playing with children, giving them good luck. Nowadays, when we imagine pixies, we picture these tiny creatures with pointy ears and wings, kind of like elves. But back in the Victorian era, people thought they wore nothing more than tattered old clothes. As Christianity became more prominent in Britain, the stories about pixies started to change a bit. Some said that pixies were actually the souls of kids who hadn't been baptized and died shortly after their funeral. Instead of moving on to the afterlife, they became pixies, still innocent and childlike, but stuck in some sort of fairy limbo. Sounds scary. Now would be the good time to dive into the world of Banshees, those eerie beings from Irish folklore, often seen as signs of death. The term Banshee roughly translates to woman of the fairy mound in Old Irish, and they've been a part of many cultures for centuries. Now, banshees can appear in different forms. Their eyes are said to be red and swollen from constant weeping. The elder banshees are typically short, wearing a green dress and a gray cloak, while the younger ones are taller, with hair of red, silver, or gold, and wear a white dress. Spotting a banshee is seen as a sure sign of bad news. One explanation for banshees is that they're the spirits of young women who met a tragic end. If these women were mistreated in life, they might stick around in the afterlife, filled with anger and waiting to punish the ones who hurt them. There's also the kind of banshees that linger and watch over their loved ones with sad songs. This ties into the tradition of keening, a vocal ritual performed at wakes and funerals in Scotland and Ireland. Banshees are also said to predict death, appearing before the actual event occurs. Those who hear their piercing cries know that their time is near. If multiple banshees are seen together, the impending death is supposed to be of great significance. Now, banshees themselves aren't seen as evil fairies, but given the unsettling stories surrounding them, it's no wonder most people would prefer to steer clear of them. Now, here's something interesting to think of. There's this idea that fairies might have been big shots back in the day, like ancient gods people used to worship. But as time went on, people stopped believing in them. Fairies got downgraded to just being seen as make-believe. The church had its own take on it, suggesting that fairies were actually angels who got kicked out of heaven. According to this story, when heaven's gates closed, those angels stuck in the middle ground between heaven and hell became fairies. Fast forward to the 17th century, and suddenly fairies got a bad rap. The church started calling them demons, and even those friendly house spirits like brownies and hobgoblins weren't spared. They were all lumped together with witchcraft and wickedness, and anyone spreading fairy tales risked getting in trouble. In places like Scotland and Ireland, there's this legend about the sloth, a cloud of souls that flew around on Halloween. Back in the old days, people thought meeting this thing brought about sadness and despair. And then there's the church's spin on the sloth. They said it wasn't fairies, but the souls of sinners doomed to fly around forever. Today, when we talk about fairies, we're talking about a whole bunch of mythical creatures from different cultures. It's crazy to think that fairies aren't all rainbows and sunshine. Turns out, many of these stories are pretty tragic. And if you like to learn all about ancient mythology and folklore, click on this next video to find out more about the neglected children of Loki.